Graceful Bhagavan, Saroja Krishnan. When I was young, maybe in my teens, I used to sit in the hall, watching with interest the happenings around me. Who comes into the hall, who goes out, what they say, what Bhagavan does, and at whom he directs his gaze, were all matters of interest to me. I would feel elated and proud whenever his gaze rested on me. One day, I was seated near the second door under the windows, idly watching, as usual, when Bhagavan's eyes turned to me and rested there. The usual first feeling of pride and elation fell away, and my eyes were locked in his, unable to turn away. How does one describe the indescribable? Dark and wide, cool and bright, melting with mercy and kindness. Those heavenly orbs seemed to expand and fill the room and all space, engulfing me and everything else. Time stood still. I can't say how long I gazed like this. Maybe a minute, maybe an hour. Looking back, I understand that this was his Nayana Diksha, initiation by look. This has the power to scorch all our vasanas and lead to liberty. I did not know anything of this then, but merely felt happy. Surely, Bhagavan's look of grace never goes waste. The seed that was planted then is sure to bear fruit sometime. But when is the burning question. I wait. I was about 15 or 16. I was undergoing mental suffering. People around were avoiding me. My husband was not in town. In despair, I tried to put an end to my life by fasting continuously for 4 or 5 days, but did not succeed. It was at that time that Uncle Rajagopala Iyer engaged a taxi to take Aunt Tangammal, my mother Gauri, and others to Tiruvannamalai. With my mother-in-law's permission, he took me along. Even here, my mental agony continued. The time came for us to return home. In the hall, Bhagavan was seated on the sofa, leaning against the cushions. One by one, they prostrated and took leave. I was the last. With a heavy heart, I prostrated to him. When I raised my head, my eyes fell on Bhagavan's feet, planted firmly together on a low stool placed in front of the sofa. My hands shot forward of their own volition, as if propelled by some powerful force, and grasped those feet. It was only for an instant. I rose and almost ran out of the hall in trepidation, startled at my own temerity. Even though I had a feeling that Bhagavan was looking at me, I could not summon the courage to look up at him. A fount of happiness seemed to burst forth from somewhere deep within me. Wave after wave of bliss washed over me, and I seemed to be floating in it. I was oblivious of everything else. On the journey back, others were singing songs on Bhagavan and talking, but nothing seemed to register in my mind. Thoughts of Bhagavan and the surging happiness absorbed every nook and corner of my being. Pain had disappeared without a trace. At home, even though the old situation continued, nothing touched me. The song in my heart stayed with me for quite some time, but gradually started waning. External circumstances also changed. Thinking back, now at this point of time, I feel that Bhagavan has granted me his Sparsha Diksha, initiation by touch. I had never seen Bhagavan place his feet like that on the stool. But for Bhagavan's will, I would not have dared to place my hands on his feet. Bhagavan gave me the courage to hold him. Above all, whence came that overwhelming happiness? How? And why? What was it? In my lifetime, I have never experienced anything remotely resembling it. Were this a common occurrence? All his attendants would have experienced it. That was not the case. The fruit of Bhagavan's grace is deliverance and is sure to be mine someday. I am sure that it was only with the purpose of mitigating the suffering of this helpless girl that my Bhagavan, in his infinite mercy, lent me those sacred feet to hold and the courage to hold them. On a hot summer day, Bhagavan was sitting in the pandal. In those days, a summer shelter for the sake of coolness used to be erected between the eastern side window of Bhagavan's hall and the well. Only a few persons were there. I took this opportunity to ask Bhagavan something that I had wanted to for a long time. I went and stood near him and said in a low voice, "Is it true that women should not practice meditation?" Bhagavan, who was sitting calmly, leaning on the cushions, sat up bolt upright and said in a loud voice, "Who said so?" It sounded like a roar. Startled and trembling, I murmured something and returned to my place. It is well known that Bhagavan has always asserted that there is no difference between a man and woman in matters such as meditation, samadhi, and liberation. When Bhagavan said, "Who said so?" firmly, it was as if he had set his seal of approval on the charter of women's spiritual liberation. In my young days, I used to ask Bhagavan to grant me all kinds of paltry things that I deemed important at that time. It was like begging a pace from a billionaire, and every time I desired, boon was granted. Perhaps out of pity for my utter stupidity. I don't remember not getting the thing I wished for. Up till now, my firm belief that I had only to petition him and it would be granted had never been belied. Bhagavan would listen and would either nod or say, Rarely would he ask for some clarification. But seemingly impossible things just took place. When the Second World War was raging, all of us returned to Salem from Ceylon, Sri Lanka of today. My husband alone stayed back. He was firmly determined to return only after selling our coconut estate there. When we were in Salem, heard that Ceylon had been bombed, we became very anxious. Who would buy an estate in Batticalow that was being bombed? That too, it was the biggest estate in Ceylon. The sale seemed impossible and my husband would not return without selling it. The only way out that I knew was to take refuge in Bhagavan Ramana. The impossible became possible at the last minute. Some Chettiar purchased the estate at a price that was also advantageous to us. My husband came home safe and sound. Bhagavan's grace also procured him a job in the central government service, although he had crossed the age limit for selection. I had passed the teens and had been married for 6 years. People started advising me to visit this or that temple, go on pilgrimage, or take up some vow for the gift of a baby. Even from my childhood, I had been inordinately fond of babies. Even my mother had petitioned Bhagavan on my behalf. Bhagavan said, it seems, there is a song in Tiruppugar, Tandayani Vendayam, which is said to confer the boon of a baby on the singer. I learned this song and on 3 occasions sang it in Bhagavan's presence, accompanying myself on the veena. It was only after this that my son Ramana was born. Similarly, another song in Tiruppugar, Neelangol Megathin, was pointed out by Bhagavan as meant for nubile girls praying for good husbands. My sister-in-law Hamsa and cousin Sharada were among the girls who sang the song and were happily married. There was a celebration in the ashram a few days after I sang the baby song in the hall. Might have been Bhagavan's Jayanti. I cannot recall exactly. The big pandal put up for the occasion was full. People, mostly with eyes closed in meditation, were sitting in silent rows. There was a low bamboo fence around Bhagavan. Mr. Osborne's 2-year-old baby son, Adam, somehow crept into the enclosure and toddled towards Bhagavan, who gave him his usual smile of welcome. After a while, the child returned to the fence and, not knowing how to cross it, stood in bewilderment. Uncle Rajagopal had a vivid thought, as he told us later. Saroja has sung the Tiruppugar in Bhagavan's presence. If she comes and picks up Adam, a son would be born to her within a year. I was sitting at the farthest end of the long hall. Seeing the child struggling to come out, I rose automatically and, crossing the length of the hall, reached the fence. Bending over, I picked up Adam and put him down near his mummy, of course, after a cuddle kiss to the chubby little one. On reaching home, Chittappa told us about his thought in Bhagavan's presence and declared like an oracle, "I bet a son will be born to her within a year." And so it transpired. I did not stop my daily practice of going round Bhagavan's hall 108 times, carrying the heavy load of advanced pregnancy, and brought on myself the severe censure from the ladies of the kitchen. Medical facility in Tiruvannamalai was rather inadequate. So, my mother was anxious and decided to take Bhagavan's advice. With this in mind, she was entering the hall when she heard Bhagavan telling someone firmly and loudly, "No, not here." On hearing this, my mother immediately decided to take me to Vellore. Bhagavan's reply had been received, even though nothing was specifically asked. With Bhagavan's guidance, under Rajagopala Iyer, who took me and mother to Vellore. Initially, we stayed at a place which was far from the town and inconvenient to us. Uncle Rajagopala Iyer went hunting for a place near the hospital. While he was walking along, he saw a cart being loaded with household articles in front of a house. Straight away, he entered the house and made inquiries. A portion of the house had just been vacated and the householder agreed to rent it to us. Uncle settled us there on the same day and returned to Tiruvannamalai and narrated to Bhagavan the details. Bhagavan listened to everything that happened at Vellore and said with an innocent air, "Number 1 in Kasi Vishwanathar Kovil Street? Looking through the window of the front room, you can see straight ahead up to Garbhagriha of the Vishwanathar temple across the road. The veranda is rather high, but there would be a bad stink from the gutter nearby." The people in the hall looked at each other with a wild surprise. Bhagavan has never been to Vellore, but he describing the place. They were excited, thinking that Bhagavan had inadvertently admitted his clairvoyance. After a pause, Bhagavan said with a smile, "Nayana stayed in that house for quite some time. Mahadevan was born there. In his letters to me, he would always describe everything in detail." Everybody laughed. Would Bhagavan, who had always been strictly against any display of siddhis, ever admit to having performed them? He would always point out a rationale behind every miracle that took place in his presence and make it seem an ordinary occurrence. I was well into the 3rd day of dry labor, without making much progress, despite repeated alternate administrations of pituitary and morphia, which left me in a comatose condition. The 3rd night, the doctor decided to do a caesarean section, often fatal in the pre-penicillin days. They feared that the baby could not be taken out in one piece, and any further delay would endanger the mother's life also. My mother and others were in great distress on hearing this and sent off a telegram of appeal to Bhagavan, our sole refuge. Bhagavan saw the telegram at 1:30 past midnight and exclaimed, "Is it our Saroja?" When I heard this later, I could hardly believe that Bhagavan had said so, though I felt very happy and proud. Bhagavan has referred to me as our Saroja. He has accepted me. What tapas have I ever done to merit this? What sacrifice have I ever made or meritorious deed performed to earn this supreme accolade? Bhagavan read the telegram in Tiruvannamalai, and instantly in Vellore, my baby son Ramana Kumar was born by normal, easy delivery. The doctors were confounded, naturally, that after 3 whole days of dry labor, after the instruments had been sterilized and the surgeon donned the gloves preparatory to doing a cesarean, a normal delivery should occur without recourse to even the forceps. Could there be the least doubt as to who is behind the whole happening? First, the mention of the song and its performance, the Adam episode, the firm no, at the opportune moment, necessitating the move to Vellore for delivery, the lucky chance of finding the house, which turned out to be the former residence of Nayana and where his son was born, hence known to Bhagavan, the wasted labor resulting in the necessity of a cesarean, and finally the telegram culminating with impossible normal delivery. It is transparent who masterminded, or should I say non-minded, the whole chain of events. But could it be pinned on him? No way. Solid reasons had been provided for the rationalist and for us to remember not to get carried away by miraculous happenings. I was staying with my brother Ramayya, who was stationed as sub-inspector in Annur when my baby was 6 months old. There were a few cases of smallpox in town. Suddenly, Ramana developed a high temperature. The doctor suspected smallpox. Frightened, I dispatched a telegram to Bhagavan immediately. Within minutes, Bhagavan's prasad arrived from the ashram. It had been dispatched a few days earlier by the ashram after some puja or other and had arrived at an opportune moment when it was desperately needed, as if in answer to my fervent prayers. At sight of my Bhagavan's prasad, all fears fled and peace flooded my heart, and I began calmly applying the vibhuti to the swelling on my baby's leg. The next day, the doctor declared that it was not smallpox, to my great relief. But the high temperature persisted and the red swelling in the foot was spreading upwards. Though the doctor did not tell me at the time, what Ramana had was a dread childhood disease known in Tamil as Odukarappan, a fast-spreading eczema for which there was no known remedy then. It was characterized by high temperature accompanied by a red swelling in the foot, which would creep up the leg until it reaches the chest, when the patient would collapse. Blissfully ignorant of all this, I went on calmly applying the vibhuti to the baby's swollen leg, praying the while. The child lay moaning in my lap, ravaged by the disease. The rapidly rising angry red swelling reached the thigh. It stopped there and started to recede, and the fever came down. Next morning, when the doctor saw the now peacefully sleeping baby, he was happily surprised. He had only been administering placebos to reassure me, as there was no known remedy. He said he had felt great pity on seeing my glad relief when he said it was not the pox. Because pox was curable, this one was not. I am sure when Bhagavan saw the telegram in Tiruvannamalai in Annur, the rising swelling in baby's leg had stopped and receded, and the disease had retreated, defeated. The attention paid by Bhagavan to the artless talk of the little children was no way less than that paid to the great wise scholars. 6-year-old Ramana had come down from Delhi on a summer vacation. He sat down in front of Bhagavan, crossed his legs in imitation and said proudly, "Bhagavan, I too did tapas this morning on the mountain." He had climbed up a little way and had sat there for a while. Bhagavan placed his forefinger on his nose in surprise and exclaimed with a smile, "He did tapas, it seems." Feeling proud and encouraged, Ramana stood up, recited some poem or essay learnt at school with proper gestures. Bhagavan listened with rapt attention and obvious enjoyment. He was not pally acting to please a child, any more than when listening to the learned ones. Weren't all his children treated with equal surplus courtesy and kindness? He was a child at that time, listening in empathy. One morning, my uncle Rajagopala Iyer came home in great haste, hurriedly took a 2 anna piece, about 13 paise in modern coin, and ran back without saying anything. We were all much intrigued by this behavior until he came home in the evening and explained the matter. It was an illuminating event. Bhagavan was coming down the hill after his morning stroll as usual. Suddenly, a dove fell down at his feet. Bhagavan bent down and picking it up, cradled it in his arms and gently soothed it by passing his arms lightly over its back. Then he turned around to see how the bird happened to fall down. A young hunter was hesitantly standing a little distance away with a catapult in his hand. Bhagavan remarked so to us, "This is the poor boy's food, but 2 annas would do to buy something to satisfy his hunger." Uncle Rajagopala Iyer and an attendant had accompanied Bhagavan and were standing by his side. One word from Bhagavan, one of them would have run down and brought the money in a minute from the office. Did he ever consider ashram as is? In his eagerness to carry out Bhagavan's remark and desire to pay it from his own pocket, Uncle ran down to the office and without mentioning anything, borrowed the 2 annas for himself, went up and paid off the hunter boy. He immediately returned the money to the office, having run home to fetch it. To be the one to carry out the words of Bhagavan was his deepest desire. Bhagavan did not send word to the office even for this paltry sum. Perhaps he to whom belonged all certain creation wanted to show us that he considered nothing as belonging to him, that he owned nothing. The dove lay still and dazed in Bhagavan's arms. It must have been seriously injured. It did not move even after Bhagavan came back to the hall. A few drops of green grapes squeezed on its head would cure him, Bhagavan was saying. When an outstation devotee entered the hall with a few bunches of green grapes as an offering to Bhagavan, "Hey, look, we are just talking about green grapes and here they are," exclaimed Bhagavan. A few drops of grape juice were applied to the dove's head. In a short while, the bird stirred, raised its head and looked around. After a few tentative steps, it fluttered its wings as if to show Bhagavan that it had recovered and took to its wings. Where, when, and how did Bhagavan learn this treatment for birds? And who is the vet who taught him? My uncle Rajagopala Iyer is an outstanding example of how Bhagavan's grace continues to guide his devotees after he had shed his body. He was a very persuasive talker. He could talk you into doing things even against your will. Such was the power of his words. He played a significant role in the shaping and writing of Bhagavan's will. His is one of the witnessing signatures. His surrender to Bhagavan was total. Vexed at his incessant talking and its effects, sometimes deleterious, his wife Tangammal and others would remonstrate. But he would declare, "I fear no one. I shall stop talking only when my Bhagavan bids me." At the fag end of his life, Chittappa had a vivid dream one night, in which Bhagavan struck him with his stick, saying, "Shut up." From then onwards, until death, he preserved silence, showing no interest in anything, completely detached. I did not meet him, but heard the momentous news from devotees coming from Bangalore, where Rajagopala Iyer was living with his youngest son Ramanan. Mahalakshmamma of Bangalore referred to it as a miracle, which indeed it was, and his granddaughter Ramani confirmed the news. In order to redeem his ardent devotee, Bhagavan had bound his incessantly wagging tongue and stilled the ever-roaming mind. Many incidents in my life can simply be called coincidences, but I consider all of them as Bhagavan's Leela and grace. Bhagavan returned me to the shelter of those beloved feet that he bade me clasp so long ago. Om Shri Ramanarpanamastu. If a seeker after moksha sets his mind on miscellaneous siddhis, bondage tightens, as the roots of ego swell in size and strength. Garland of Guru's Sayings, verse 222.